Hello everyone, this is The Lost Boy. Thanks for clicking on this video. Has anyone ever noticed the Halo games seem to have no plot whatsoever? I've just been playing through Halo 3 and Halo 4 again, and ever since I started playing these games, it's very difficult to pay attention to what's going on. I've always liked sci-fi, I've always really liked the Halo games, but it seems almost impossible to pay attention to what's actually happening story-wise. Anyways, just a thought. Another thing I thought I'd mention was that violence in video games is back in the news this week. After a massive shooting at a Florida high school, a governor from Kentucky named Matt Bevin decided it would be appropriate to lay the blame almost entirely at the feet of violence in video games and movies. And then, the orange head in chief jumped on the bandwagon and started to repeat basically the exact same thing. This is the most ridiculous thing ever. I can't believe people are still saying this. I may actually have to do a full video on this in the future, but we'll see. On to this week's main topic. This is a topic some of you may not know too much about: crunch time in the video games industry. Crunch, or crunch time, is a term that's used in the games industry as well as several other industries to describe the part of the development cycle which sometimes occurs when there's not enough time left to finish the assets and programming and everything else that goes into a video game actually on time. The result is that mostly everyone involved in the development of the game is required to work more than the typical 40 hours per week. Work weeks can be as long as 80 to even 100 hours. Crunch time has been an accepted part of game development for many years now. Also, it's a part of many other artistic and technical industries. This likely has at least some foundation in how male-dominated the industry has been. There always seems to be a larger amount of respect given to the toughest individuals in such scenarios. When I attended game dev school, we were warned by teachers of game studios which had perks, like free vending machines, rec rooms full of video games and other fun activities, and even areas for sleeping. The warning was that the more of these perks a studio has, the more likely it is that there will be long stretches of time where it's not really considered very cool of you to actually leave work at all. It sounded pretty bad to me at the time, and it still does. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying people are or should be unwilling to put in extra time and effort at their job from time to time when circumstances require that for whatever reason. The difference here is the regularity and severity of these practices in the games industry. Also, to be fair, I'm sure not all development studios are guilty of crunching regularly, but I do think that the average consumer of games has really no idea how severe and widespread this problem is. Another factor seems to be the tortured artist paradigm. This is where a person is convinced, or convinces themselves, to believe that suffering is a necessary part of creating art. I believe this is true up to a point, but it seems to me that a game developer justifying a work practice many developers describe as life-destroying seems sort of like a novelist deciding that the only way to write a great literary novel is to become a depressed alcoholic. There's an interesting article on Polygon called "Why I Worship Crunch," which gives an insider's perspective that, while seeming to admit the damage that crunch can inflict, implies or outright states that this is really how it all should be. The link to the article is in the description. I think it's worth a read if you have a chance. Although I can sympathize and even agree with some of the points, the over-romanticizing of suffering for your art seems silly, self-aggrandizing, and unnecessary. Honestly, the article seems to contradict itself several times over, but I think the important thing to note is that the author was very adamant that this was more about his own willingness and drive than pressure from his employer. Apparently, quite a few game developers and journalists who read the article feel the same way I do. One unnamed industry insider was quoted in response to the article as saying, "I don't really take pride in the fact that crunches happened, or that I participated in them. I don't think of them as a badge of honor or anything like that, but I went through a hard thing with a bunch of people who are really important to me, and doing that together brought us closer. I think that's the value that I find in crunch." That makes sense to me. On a good team, everyone is willing to pitch in when things get hectic. What doesn't make sense is treating team members as if they are disposable, and who cares if they lose their marriage or mental or physical health. The other thing I find sort of funny is that for all the crunch time that happens, more and more games are being released in a half-baked, half-broken state. What's the point of driving all these people this hard when the games don't even work at release? Could it perhaps be that people operating for extended periods without enough sleep and recuperation time might be less productive and more mistake-prone than a well-rested and healthy team member? I wonder. One other important thing to note is that unlike the unionized film industry, Video game developers are almost never paid overtime for all those extra hours they put in during crunch. This may sound hard to believe, but there it is. Anyway, there's not much we can do as consumers to help solve a problem like this. One thing we can do is to be a bit more understanding when a release date gets pushed back, or when development timelines seem obscene. I'm looking at you, Final Fantasy VII Remake. Personally, I'd much rather wait the extra 6 months or whatever and have a game that actually works at release and didn't result in any divorces. Beyond that, it's really up to individual game developers themselves, as well as the studios that employ them and the publishers that pay the studios. Developers ought not to take it as a given that crunch time is necessary no matter what. Take stock of the situation and decide if they're being too generous with unpaid time, or if their quality of life is being affected too much. Studios ought to take a look at how best to nurture the talented teams of people they have assembled, and how to motivate and facilitate teams in healthy and sustainable ways. Publishers ought to realize that better game quality means more sales and higher profits, but that this requires that teams of developers be empowered by supportive and ethically run studios and provided with the time and resources needed to create the fantastic products that we all expect and hope for. What do you think? Should artists regularly flay themselves to the bone for their art, or is this a self-indulgent and overblown fallacy? Do you think game studios and publishers could avoid crunch time if they planned their dev cycles more accurately? Please let me know your opinions in the comments section. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button, and if you're new to the channel, you can subscribe, and if you click the little bell symbol, you'll even get notifications when new videos come out. Thanks very much for watching this video. Always remember your happy thought, and I'll see you next time.